There's something special about old horror movies that captivates and never lets go. Maybe it's the atmosphere, steeped in the smoke of old cinemas and the crackle of film reels. Back then, horror creators didn't rush. They meticulously crafted every frame, every sound, to evoke genuine fear and awe. There were no cheap effects, but instead, real acting that made you believe what was happening on screen. Directors of that era were masters at playing on our fears, creating truly iconic images that still haunt our imagination today. In those films, fear wasn't the end goal, but a tool to explore the darkest corners of the human soul. They made us think about the nature of evil, our mortality, and what lies beyond the edge of reality. Modern horror films often fall into the trap of sameness. The same monsters, the same jump scares, the same plot cliches. But in old films, things were different. Each new movie was a small discovery, capable of surprising and impressing even the most seasoned viewer. Directors of the past weren't afraid to experiment. They created unique worlds inhabited by strange and unusual beings. The atmosphere of old horror films wasn't just a backdrop, but an integral part of the storytelling. It created a sense of anxiety, anticipation, and sometimes outright terror. Old mansions with dusty libraries, dark basements, and abandoned Gothic castles. All of this fostered a sense of mystery and danger. Sharp contrasts between light and dark heightened the feeling of unease. A shadow falling on a character's face could turn them into a monster. Interior objects, paintings, old books, everything carried meaning and added to the aura of mystery. For instance, in Nosferatu, 1922, the dark sets and expressive play of light and shadow conjure the image of a sinister vampire that seems like the embodiment of pure evil. Music in old horror films was often dissonant, creating a feeling of anxiety and tension. The sound of wind, creaking doors, ticking clocks, these sounds heightened the sense of something supernatural lurking nearby. Sometimes the scariest thing is the complete absence of sound. Silence creates the sensation of held breath, the expectation of something terrifying. The soundtrack to Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, is a classic example of using music to build tension. The alternation of bright and dark scenes creates a feeling of unease and disorientation. Distorted shadows can turn ordinary objects into terrifying monsters. Unusual camera angles allow us to see the world through the eyes of the protagonist, intensifying the sense of fear. In Kubrick's The Shining, 1980, the interplay of light and shadow creates a sense of claustrophobia and paranoia. Gloomy costumes and frightening makeup create memorable monster images. Long, smooth camera movements give a sense of immersion in the action. Sound effects like rustling, creaking, and screaming enhance the feeling of terror. The combination of all these elements creates the unique atmosphere of old horror films, making the viewer empathize with the characters and dive into a world of nightmares. The characters in old horror films aren't just villains. They're entire worlds brought to life on the screen. What makes them so memorable? And why do we continue to fear them decades later? Why do the characters of old horror fascinate us so much? They aren't just flat villains, but complex individuals with their own motives and backstories. They often embody our deepest fears: death, loneliness, madness. Even the most monstrous characters have a charisma that both attracts and terrifies at the same time. Why were they so popular? Each character reflected deep societal fears of the time. The fear of war, Frankenstein. The fear of plague, the mummy. The fear of the unknown, the Wolfman. At that time, cinema was still in its infancy, and every new image was a genuine discovery. Gloomy castles, dark basements, Gothic costumes. All of this created a unique atmosphere that stuck with audiences. Old and new horror films certainly evoke different emotions in the viewer. What's the difference? And why do we react differently to classic and modern horror? Old horror films rarely rely on sudden jump scares. They build an atmosphere of slowly mounting tension, keeping the viewer in a constant state of anxiety. The absence of modern special effects forces the viewer to fill in the gaps with their own imagination. This amplifies the fear and makes it more personal. Often, the focus is on the psychological problems of the characters, their fears and phobias. This makes the horror deeper and more multifaceted. Old horror films frequently explore themes that go beyond our understanding. The supernatural, mysticism, madness. The viewer is always waiting for something dreadful. Many old horror films create a sense of confinement, intensifying the feeling of unease. The audience begins to doubt the reality of what's happening and their own safety. So, what's the difference between fear and modern horror? Modern horror films often frighten the viewer with loud noises and sudden monster appearances. The focus is on bloody scenes and realistic special effects. Many modern horror films use the same techniques, which lessens the element of surprise. The viewer can often predict what will happen next. But what feelings do they provoke? Loud sounds and sudden appearances cause momentary fright. Bloody scenes can provoke disgust, and the use of cliches and tropes can irritate the viewer. Why do old horror films remain special to me? Perhaps it's because there's something real, something genuine about them. These films aren't just about fear. They explore us, making us think about what we're truly afraid of. And of course, they're tied to my memories of those first scary nights in front of the screen, when the shadows outside the window seemed alive and every creak of the floor sent chills down my spine. Old horror films aren't just movies. They're portals to worlds where fear envelopes slowly, making your heart beat faster. They remind us of times when it didn't take 1,000 special effects to truly scare you. And perhaps that's why I keep coming back to them, for that special, deep-rooted fear that stays with me to this day.